When an individual enters the military, they begin with basic training. And during this time, their drill sergeant teaches them the fundamentals of what it means to be a soldier. Now, when a private gets something wrong, the drill sergeant is kind enough to inform them that they are wrong. Now, this may come in the form of making them do push-ups or running miles or some other penalty or some other form of punishment. But understand, this is not done. They don't do that just simply because, okay, this is the punishment for what you did. They're doing that so that new inductee adopts the proper understanding and behavior and skills that are necessary for them to function in the military. And this is what is referred to as discipline. At the end of chapter 10, the writer had noted that the Hebrew believers were facing this time of persecution, and he encouraged them to persevere. And he gave them the key to enduring through that persecution was to live by faith. That we are called to live by faith. Chapter 11 explains what that means, what it means to have faith, what it means to live by faith. And he gives us example after example after example in the Old Testament, and finally comes to the point where he says, I could keep going, but there's too many and time's too short. So, but he has revealed to us what that is. And so as we come into chapter 12, he says, therefore, since we also have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every weight and sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the source and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that lay before him endured a cross and despised the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of God's throne. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, so that you won't grow weary and lose heart. In struggling against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And you have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons. My son, do not take the Lord's discipline lightly or faint when you are reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and punishes every son he receives. Endure suffering as discipline. God is dealing with you as sons. For what son is there that a father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, which all receive, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Therefore, or furthermore, we have natural fathers discipline us, and we respect them. Shouldn't we submit even more to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time based on what seems good to them, but he does it for our benefit so that you can share his holiness. No discipline seems enjoyable at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it yields fruit of peace and righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your tired hands and weakened knees, and make straight your paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but healed instead. So the writer is still focusing on this encouragement that had begun at the end of chapter 10. This is still in the same vein. You're beginning to face this persecution. You're going through these hard times, and so he is encouraging them to continue to deal with that and to endure. And again, the key to staying true in that persecution is holding on to the faith in Christ, who is, as the writer of Hebrews says, the author and finisher of our faith. He is the originator. He is the one that we put our faith in initially, and it is in him that we find the fulfillment of our faith, ultimately. The old hymn, Sweet Hour of Prayer, where it talks about putting aside the hour of prayer there at the end when we see Christ in person. And this is the reality, because a day will come when we will step out of this life and into his presence, and it will no longer be a race of faith. It will be in his presence. So he is the author and he is the finisher. He is the starting point and the finishing point of the race of faith, if you will. And so when he starts off, he says, therefore, and I've talked about this before, you've all heard it, but it is an important word. When you see therefore or wherefore, you stop and see what it's there for. He's linking what he's about to talk about to what he has been talking about. What has he been talking about? Great hall of faith, the example of walking by faith. And now he says there's this great cloud of witnesses. Now, who is he talking about? He's talking about the people he just talked about, the Old Testament saints. Now, is he literally saying that they are there in heaven and they're able to look down and watch us? There is some people who think that God gives insight to people there, but that's not hardly confirmed. What he's basically saying is that we are in the same race as they have been in. Even if they cannot, and they're not actually actively seeing us on heaven's version of ESPN, they still are actively supporting and encouraging the saints that are on this earth, even if they don't know them personally. But what he tells us is that what you need to do is lay aside, he says, every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Because he's drawing the picture here of a race, of running a race, and specifically a marathon. And here's the simple thing. If you've ever watched, especially like in the Olympics and things like that, when people run a race, if you notice, they don't run around carrying a lot of stuff. In fact, even the clothing that they wear, there have been some runners in races that have worn these experimental suits that cut down on air drag that have been outlawed by different things because it gives them such an advantage. But the simple fact is a runner does not, especially a long distance runner, a marathon runner, the last thing they want is to carry a lot of weight. This is why long distance runners tend to be about that big around, because they don't want the weight. Because they have, if you're running a marathon, that's 26.6 miles that you're running, and the more weight you carry, the harder it is to do. So they lay aside everything. And so he points out basically two things. He says that every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us. So basically he says there's these two things. Those things that hold you back, those things that hold you down, and these are not necessarily sinful things. To bring us back to kind of what we talked a little bit about on Sunday when Paul talks about forgetting those things which are behind, there are some things that we need to leave behind us, that we need to drop, because if we don't, they'll hold us back. But then we also have to be aware and be careful of sin, because sin will trip us up. We're not, like I said, the picture here is that of a marathon runner, but in the course of that marathon, you have the devil who keeps putting out these little tripwires of sin that you got to watch out for as well. So he warns us about these two things. But again, the challenge is to endure, and he says that he tells us to keep our eyes on Jesus. Why? Because he is the conclusion. He is what we are running for. He is what we are pursuing. And the ultimate picture of endurance, while all of these Old Testament saints were great pictures of carrying on and continuing to walk in faith, regardless of what they faced, the ultimate picture is that of Jesus. Because Christ endured. He endured the vocal attacks. He endured the attacks of the world. He endured the attacks of Satan. He endured physical assaults. And he even endured the cross. And he refused at any point in time to turn aside from that purpose in doing the will of the Father. And so he is our perfect example of what it means to endure and what we should be pursuing. But the writer in here, he includes in this here in verse 4, he says, in struggling against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Now, what is he talking about? Well, simply put, the point he's making is Jesus went all the way to Calvary's cross. None of you have, and none of us have gone through what Jesus did. But Jesus endured. Yes, there have been Christian martyrs. There have been people who have gone to the point of shedding their blood. But even at that, there's still no one who has ever gone as far as Christ has gone. And this is, and if Christ was willing to go that far, and he was willing to endure that much, how much are we willing to endure for him? This is the idea here. So if you have to deal with some persecution, if you have to deal with some ne'er-do-wells, if you have to deal with some challenges and some traps that Satan sets at your feet, you have to deal with some disgruntled people who want to cause you problems. Is that anything worse than what Christ did for you? And this is kind of the picture here. Now he goes in from there and he says something else. He kind of changes up the theme about it, because remember, he was talking about persecution, and at the point in which this was written historically, the Roman persecution from Emperor Nero was at its peak. It was running at its highest point. And this is obvious persecution. This is governmental forces. This is authorities that are coming and cracking down on Christians, on believers. And that is what he is addressing at the moment, but he kind of changes this around and he starts backing it out and says, but there's another way that you need to look at this as well. And we've talked about suffering before. Remember, suffering can come from a number of different sources. Some suffering we endure because we live in an imperfect world. You know, we catch a cold because we live in an imperfect world. You walk outside and you're not wearing shoes or you're wearing sandals and you get a sticker in your foot. We live in an imperfect world. Some suffering that we endure, it comes from our own faults and failures. We shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes. We do things and we hurt ourselves and we go back and later on we realize, you know what, that was really stupid of me. Why did I do that? But we have to suffer for that. Some suffering comes from other people, whether it's intentional or unintended, but other people hurt us and other people cause us to suffer. But what the writer of Hebrews here goes into and what he draws into is that all suffering, everything that comes within our lives, it all comes in with the permission and the purpose of God. In other words, even if we live in an imperfect world and we catch a cold, that still comes into our life because God allowed it. Even if someone hurts us, it's because God allowed it and God has a purpose. And so he says, listen, you need to review and change how you're viewing this from these people are doing all of these things and instead view it as God has a purpose in my life that he is working to fulfill. And view it from the perspective of discipline. He says, consider all suffering. Every type of suffering, regardless of its source, as discipline from God. Now again, let me make this clear. Discipline is not punishment for wrongdoing. Rather, discipline is instilling good behavior and good character. Now, when I was growing up and my brothers would do something wrong, Never me, of course. My dad would spank them. And why did he spank? So that we would stop doing the wrong things. But in addition, discipline also comes in so that we start adopting proper character and proper behavior. It's not just to weed out, yes, it is to weed out the bad, but it's also to instill the good. And so the child of God will be disciplined to weed out the bad and instill the good. That is the whole point and the whole purpose of discipline. And the writer of Hebrews says, listen, God is going to do that. He is going to discipline you. Because the ultimate goal is to make you like Christ. To instill the character of Jesus Christ in you. To instill the worldview of Jesus Christ in you. And to get there means that some things have to go and some new things have to be brought in. And this is the whole point and the purpose of discipline. And the simple fact is yes, we have to get spiritual spankings so that we stop doing some things. But for us also to learn certain things, it also requires hardship. You don't learn patience unless you're forced to wait. You don't learn faith unless you are forced to trust in the Lord. The Lord takes us through hardships and through difficulties, and yes, even uses persecution to instill godly character in us. Now, there is this inverse thought that the writer of Hebrews points out. He says basically, he tells us, God is going to discipline every child. But if you never get disciplined by God, you're not a child. If you never face discipline from God, and He never seeks to correct your behavior and weed out the negative, and He never seeks to instill the good within you, you are not a child of God. You don't belong to Him at all. Now, I heard one preacher make the comment, he said, we have been very good about preaching that there is one way to the Lord, and that is through Jesus Christ. But we've been very bad about talking about that narrow road. And the simple fact is we have been called to walk a narrow road. Not the wide, wandering path, but the very narrow and straight road. And to maintain that path requires discipline. It requires the Lord working. And the reason why if a person does not receive discipline, they're not a child. Because being a child of God is only established through faith in the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. I gave you this cross-reference from Matthew 7, where Jesus says, in that day, not everyone who will come to me, or he said, there will be many who come to me who say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy? Did we not cast out demons? Did we not do all these other things in your name? And Jesus' response will be, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, for I never knew you. Because they come in and they say, look at my big long list of works. But the problem is, their faith is in their works, their faith is not in Jesus Christ. And so they are dismissed. They are discarded. They thought they were children. They thought they were sons. Only to realize they weren't. So this is the reality. So the writer of Hebrews gives that warning. Hey, if you don't get a heavenly spanking every now and then you might want to sit back and ask the question, why? You might want to look at yourself. And that brings us to these last two verses 12 and 13. He says, therefore strengthen your tired hands and weakened knees. The idea, the picture here is that the joints that are stiff from exertion, joints that are sore from effort. You know, the hands that have been working all day long and you just want to rest. Says, no. Even if you're hurting, even if you're struggling, strengthen the joints. And of course, this is strengthening ourselves in the power of God. Not in and of ourselves, but in His power. And for the person, he says there in verse 13, and make straight paths for your feet. The idea being here is this, that you move directly towards something. And again, this plays on the same imagery that Jesus gave there in the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about the broad is the way to destruction, and it's kind of meandering, it curves, and he says no, the way to heaven is the straight and narrow. Why does he say straight and narrow? Because it's direct. You don't wander one way or the other. You focus on what the goal, what the end goal is, and you walk that road. Because here's the problem. When you start having to turn or you start veering off the trail and something comes up, one of those things that so easily besets us, or those sins, those traps of the devil, and he starts jangling that thing that looks really good over here, then the next thing you know, you're walking off the path and you're getting hurt. So he says, make your path straight. Focus on where you're heading and go there. You might be tired. You might be weary. Keep going. Endure. Because Christ endured. Christ endured for us. We can endure. You will never go through anything worse than what Christ did. In fact, you will never go through anything as bad as Christ did. And understand something, that the whole reason that this is in your life right now, and by the way, let me say this isn't in the notes, but all suffering is only for a season. We are given periods of rest. But the reason it's in your life now is because God has something He's trying to do in and through you. Because He's trying to teach you something. Because He's trying to grow you. Because He's trying to make you into something. He is disciplining you. He is instilling good behavior, or He's getting rid of some bad behavior. But He is working to make you more and more and more like Jesus Christ. And the writer of Hebrews, I love that he says it. He says no discipline seems enjoyable at the time. No one likes it. No one wants to go through it. But that's not really the point. It's not about whether you like it or not. It's about what's being produced inside of you. It's about whether or not fruit is being produced inside of you. Whether those godly characteristics are being developed in you? Are you being changed? And if we learn, again, to look at suffering the way the writer of Hebrews right here tells us, look at it as discipline from God. Regardless of the source, look at it as discipline from God. If we start to view it in that way, we say, okay, God, you brought this into my life for a purpose. Help me understand your purpose. Help me understand what you're trying to teach me. If there's something I need to get rid of, help me get rid of that. If there's something I need to adopt, help me adopt it. Then you will actually, as you learn to embrace that, it will actually can easily shorten the duration of suffering. Whereas if we fight and we kick and we scream, it makes it worse. To take you back to growing up, my dad basically had a rule. If we fought him when he went to go give us a spanking, it got worse. And my oldest brother and myself, we figured that out. So we understood, okay, if I just go and I just take it, it's going to be set and done. My sister and my other brother, not so much. My brother Jonathan, he would try to run, he would try to hide. My sister was hard-headed and she would fight and struggle the entire time. And it was always going to be worse for them. Because instead of embracing the discipline and enduring it, by fighting against it, they just made it that much worse. If we learn to embrace what God is doing in our lives, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's unpleasant, even if it's painful, it'll actually begin to shorten.